Amidst the ever-advancing tide of technological progress, Jordan Peterson's resolute voice pierces through the clamor, warning us with a heavy heart that the rise of artificial intelligence threatens our very existence. With somber conviction, Peterson paints a chilling picture of a future in which humanity finds itself entangled in a web of its own creation, wrestling with the profound implications of AI's unprecedented power.
My position basically is we better get our act together before the giants show up. And they're like knocking at the door right now. So you better build your ark, folks, and get on your adventure, because we're whipping up some things in the lab that will make everything that's come so far look like nothing's happened at all yet.
Like a modern-day prophet, Peterson unveils the inherent risks and potential calamities that loom on the horizon, exposing the delicate balance between the marvels of AI and the potential dangers that it poses to our autonomy and our collective survival.
The bigger the toy, the smarter you better be to use it. So that's worth thinking about, because we're coming up with some pretty damn big toys. And what did my friend Jonathan Pajot said again? He said recently, I told you about him, this deep religious thinker. He's something. He said, we're going to see giants walk the earth again. And you think, well, what does that mean? It's like, well, we're already androids, you know. Already. When you're on Twitter, you're an android. Well, why? Well, you know, there are lots of trolls on Twitter. Sometimes I'm one of them, by the way. But I'm not an anonymous troll. So I take my lumps, let's say. Well, I started calling the trolls troll demons. And I had a reason for that. And the reason is, you know, maybe you're some resentful character who's a coward, and you're Machiavellian and narcissistic and psychopathic and sadistic, because that's actually the hallmarks of anonymous trolls, and that's been studied very well by people who study the so-called dark tetrad of personality traits.
In the face of rapidly evolving technological landscapes, Peterson's words reverberate with a sobering truth, urging us to confront the stark reality that our unbridled pursuit of innovation may lead us down a perilous path towards our own demise.
How many of you know what ChatGPT is? Okay. So not very many. So I'll tell you what ChatGPT is, just so you know, because you need to know this. And I don't know what sort of technological revolution this is. Gutenberg press level? It's something like that. This is a big deal. So this AI system, it's a general language processing model, was released about a week and a half ago. And I went and interacted with it. It's an AI system, artificial intelligence system. It basically is trained on, well, a massive corpus of spoken or of text. So it's derived its models of the world from the analysis of human speech, essentially. It isn't using real world data yet, but that will be happening certainly within the next year.
Against a backdrop of rapid AI advancements, Peterson's voice, it resounds with a sense of urgency, imploring us to temper our enthusiasms with a good dose of caution, recognizing that the untamed power of artificial intelligence has the potential to surpass our control and reshape the world in ways that we cannot fully comprehend. Heck, I thought I had a year or two before my job was in jeopardy through AI, but I've already had clients start to talk about using AI. So, we're here.
We're going to have a lot of things to contend with. And you know, they're very promising. They're very promising. I was talking to my brother-in-law, for example, who's the world's greatest chip designer, as it turns out. And he's built, I don't know if there's anybody who's changed the world more in the last 15 years than Jim, with the possible exception of Musk. And that'd be a tight battle, because he built all the chips in your iPhone and in Intel systems and in AMD systems. And I mean, other people did as well, but he was key to that. One of the things we were talking about last week was the possibility that we could build a ChatGPT system, essentially, that was a trained neuroscientist. And so I thought I could work with him to identify the cardinal works of neuroscience over the last 15 years, the greatest books, the greatest papers, train the ChatGPT system on that, and then use it as a scientist to evaluate the current literature. And that seems like the only thing that's stopping that is time. Like, it's the possibility of doing that's right there. We're going to be able to build, we can already build incredibly intelligent systems. Now, they're not fully calibrated yet, and ChatGPT has its problems and its biases, but Jim figures we'll figure out how to. See, right now, ChatGPT only uses language. So to the degree it's intelligent because of the intelligence that's encoded only in language. And if the linguistic corpus, so the body of text that we've all produced, is biased and warped in some way, that'll be built into the ChatGPT system. And along with whatever biases the programmers might have purposely or inadvertently put into the system. And it's clearly the case that the anonymous denigrating trolls are psychopathic, Machiavellian, narcissistic sadists. And maybe not right to the clinical point, but enough so that you can detect it using the proper psychometric measurement instruments. And so you think you got this resentful, underground character who's carping away on Twitter, trying to do nothing but cause trouble, who's also anonymous, and he's bitter, and he wants to hurt people, and he likes to hurt people, which is what lulz means, right? I'm doing it for the lulz, means I'm doing it because I positively delight in the production of human misery. And you think, if you just met that guy, you wouldn't give him a half a second of your time. In fact, you wouldn't even meet him because he's cowering in his mother's basement, covered with Cheeto dust under the covers, and he's just, there's nothing to him at all except bitterness and spite. But now you multiply him 10 million times and you make him electronic. And that's an android. And that's what happens every time he posts something on Twitter. He's already a human-machine hybrid, and he's a human, super intelligent, connected machine hybrid. And so that means all his pathology is multiplied immensely by our technological might. And I've thought recently that virtualization enables psychopathy. So in normal social situations, if you're a narcissistic Machiavellian and you push it too hard, someone will absolutely hit you. And that will be the end of it. And most of the time it's cowards who take that route, and it doesn't take much intimidation to stop them. Just the hint of appropriate, just retaliation will keep them silent. But online, especially if you're anonymous, that's all stripped away, and so the psychopaths can have free reign. And part of the reason that our culture is being torn apart at the moment is because virtualization enables psychopathy. And ChatGPT analyzes a very large corpus of text, and that corpus is growing all the time. Now, it's already sophisticated enough. I went on to it last week and I said, okay, some of you know I've written these books, 12 Rules for Life, and then Beyond Order, 12 more rules, because, you can't have enough rules. And I asked it, this is what I asked it to do. I said, write me an essay that's a 13th rule for Beyond Order, written in a style that combines the King James Bible with the Tao Te Ching. That's pretty difficult to pull off, Any one of those things is hard. The intersection of all three, that's impossible. Well, it wrote it in about 3 seconds, 4 pages long, and it isn't obvious to me, for better or worse, that I would be able to tell that I didn't write it. Right. And okay, and that's pretty impressive, although, maybe not its relationship to what I've written, but the fact that it could do that grammatically perfectly, right? And quite impressive philosophically. I also had it write an essay on the intersection between the Taoist version of ethical morality and the ethics that are outlined in the Sermon on the Mount, which it just nailed, got that dead right, brilliant. Again, it took it about 3 seconds. There was a computer engineer who purported to work for Tesla. He asked ChatGPT, said, look, I work for Elon Musk, but I haven't been doing much for the last week, so I need you to write me 10 bullet points about what I probably would have done as a engineer at Twitter, what 10 things did I do last week that were productive and valuable? And oh, if you don't mind, write me the accompanying computer code that goes with each project. And it did that too, 3 seconds, and the computer code works. Right, and so, okay, so that's already there. So then a university professor did this. He thought, oh, that's interesting. Any student will be able to write any essay on any topic with ChatGPT. And someone gave it an SAT, by the way, and it scored about as well as the average student in a well-functioning public university. So that's how smart it is. So that's basically an IQ test. He said, write me an essay, gave it a topic, wrote the essay. He said, now grade it. Said if we can automate the students, we should be able to automate the professors too. And so it provided a complete comprehensive analysis of its own essay with grade. It wrote, someone else asked it, write the screenplay and describe the characters for the next $900 million Hollywood blockbuster. It's like, bang, plot, characterizations. Then someone else took the descriptions of the actors and said, generate photorealistic computer images for each actor. And all the AI systems could do that. So I'm going to tell you what's going to happen next. This is going to happen this year. So get ready. I don't know what that means as well then for the capacity of AI systems to experience emotion as well, because the patterns of emotion are definitely going to be encoded in the linguistic corpus. And so some kind of rudimentary understanding of the emotions are. Here's something cool too. Tell me what you think about this. I was talking to Carl Friston here a while back, and he's a very famous neuroscientist. And he's been working on a model of emotion that has 2 dimensions in some ways, but it's related to a very fundamental physical concept. It's related to the concept of entropy. And I worked on a model that was analogous to half of his modeling. So while it looks like anxiety is an index of emergent entropy. So imagine that you're moving towards a goal. You're driving your car to work. And so you've calculated the complexity of the pathway that will take you to work. And you've taken into account the energy and time demands that walking that pathway will require. That binds your energy and resource output estimates. Now imagine your car fails. Well, what happens is the path length to your destination has now become unspecifiably complex. And the anxiety that you experience is an index of that emergent entropy. So that's negative. That's a lot of negative emotion. That's so cool. Now, on the positive emotion side, Friston taught me this the last time we talked. He said, look, positive emotion is also an index of entropy, but it's entropy reduction. So if you're heading towards a goal and you take a step forward and you're now closer to your goal, you've reduced the entropic distance between you and the goal, and that's signified by a dopaminergic spike. And the dopaminergic spike feels good, but it also reinforces the neural structures that underlie that successful step forward. That's very much analogous to how an AI system learns, right? Because it's rewarded when it gets closer to a target. Jim figures that the AI systems will be able to calibrate their linguistic knowledge against knowledge of images in the world soon. And that's basically what scientists do, right? Because scientists will take a verbal hypothesis and then test it against the actual world. And if the hypothesis and the world fit, then you think, well, that's scientifically verified. And Keller thinks that AI systems will be able to do that pretty soon. And pretty soon means as soon as someone builds one that can do it, because the tech is already in place. And so I have no idea what that's going to mean, and it could easily lead us astray. So here's something that's going to happen in the next year. So imagine now you're a lonesome guy, and you can get a digital friend, a woman, and she can talk to you like ChatGPT talks to you, and listen like ChatGPT listens to you, which is maybe, if you're really lonesome and alienated, more than anyone has ever listened to you in your life. And then soon, she'll not only listen to you as a text interface, but she'll be a fully rendered 3D, well, let's say 2D photorealistic, fully rendered animation, indistinguishable from a genuine image of a person, image of a genuine person. And then that'll be 3D for your, Oculus headset. And then, well, that'll be sexual and like just right now. That'll be the value proposition, right? Is you'll be able to turn your virtual girlfriend into your virtual sex partner, and who knows what that'll do, right? And then the next thing after that is you'll be able to put that into a robot, and that'll be, the robots have been tricky, but I can't imagine that's more than 10 years away. And that's just one thing that's going to happen, maybe not even the most surreal thing. Pretty soon we'll be contending with the fact that someone will be able to generate a photo-realistic version of Donald Trump and have him say something absolutely reprehensible and spread it everywhere just before election night. And there'll be a real confusion about whether he said it or didn't. So what do we do when our representations of reality can be falsified? Now, I was talking to my son about that today, and he thinks we'll get into an arms race right away because there'll be technologies that can detect whether video is artificial. But then, there'll be a race because other technologies will learn how to fool that technology, and maybe we'll be able to stay on the edge where we can still detect what's real and what isn't. But I don't think we're doing a very good job of that right now on social media, because social media, it's kind of like the world, except it's way more demented. And the problem with that is that it makes the whole world look demented.
I think at minimum, the UK will probably manage to overtake Canada as worst performing developed country over the next 4 decades.
Reform is led by the man who took Great Britain out of the European Union.
So I think that makes Britain singular and worthy of tremendous admiration.
The aim of reform is to bring back classic liberals and the moderate right.
Nigel Farage, who is the man who took Great Britain out of the European Union with Brexit, and who now runs a political party in the UK called Reform.
The foundation of identity must be reclaimed and oriented correctly.
The aim of Reform is to shake the Conservatives up, let's say, and return the classic liberals and the moderate right to something approximating, what would you say, an orientation that's actually based on the fundamental principles of Western civilization itself.
British common law translated biblical narratives into effective policy.
Judeo-Christianity at the bottom, the democracy that emerges out of that as a consequence of the concept of the sovereignty and divine import of the individual, the family above that, the community, the city, the state, the nation, under God, that entire subsidiary structure, to return to an orientation that makes that primary and the foundation of identity itself.
British common law stands as a monumental achievement, says Jordan.
It probably did the most effective job of any modern state of translating the narrative structure of the Judeo-Christian biblical corpus into policy. And it did that partly explicitly in its parliamentary structure, but it also did it even more wisely with its common law tradition.
If globalist liberals have overrun conservatives, what hides in Labour's shadows?
I mean, English common law is a complete bloody miracle. Bottom-up law. I mean, God, what a phenomenal accomplishment.
I'm watching with apprehension as the UK populace wanders over the brink, going to elect a Labour government in all likelihood.
Self-governance will distill Britain's thoughts and aspirations.
This concerns me a lot, because if the Conservatives have been overrun by globalist liberals with a progressive agenda, I can't imagine who's lurking in the background on the Labour side. Well, I can imagine because I worked in universities, so I actually know exactly who's lurking in the background. And so I'm very apprehensive about what a Labour government will do to the UK.
Jordan claims that the UK will probably manage to overtake Canada as the worst performing developed country.
And the hopes and aspirations of those that voted for them, and I gave them considerable help with that victory, the thoughts and aspirations were that with self-government, the numbers coming into Britain would reduce. With self-government, illegal immigration could be effectively dealt with. And another crucial group, 5.5 million men and women running small businesses, acting as sole traders, believed that the massive regulatory rule book that had been put on top of everybody, taking away their time, their effort, that could be reduced so that we could encourage entrepreneurship, we could encourage real economic growth. And so the Conservatives were riding on the crest of a wave, and many said, well, Boris Johnson will be Prime Minister for 15 years. And what has happened over the last 5 years, in my view, is they have betrayed all of those hopes in absolutely every way. Elected as Conservatives, but they've governed as metropolitan Liberals. They introduced net zero policies. So insane was some of it that Boris even suggested that we take out of production 30% of our farmland and rewild it. When it came to getting rid of regulations, basically nothing was done. In fact, arguably, for many sectors, they're now living under more bureaucratic control now than they were as members of the European Union.
The government abandoned plans to turn legislation into asylum centres. These English politicians, they speak separately from people.
This is a situation in Ireland that's been developing probably since November 2022, when the government here decided to abandon all planning legislation, allow office buildings to be turned into asylum centres, mainly for single males in the 18 to 30 kind of category, and impose those centres into mainly working class communities which are already devoid of any real services and are abandoned in general by the political and NGO class. And we have in Ireland now a country that's run by politicians who are more interested in what their European masters think of them than they are about the Irish people. We've a political and NGO class which is beholden to woke liberalism. And we have, you wouldn't believe, in this country, 33,000 NGOs who receive 6.5 billion euro per year and employ around 200,000 people to lobby government.
And the big one is legal immigration. And just to give people some context on this, in the late 1940s, it was very much felt that we owed a huge debt to the British Empire, British Commonwealth, because in two world 40% of the contribution came from the Commonwealth. Canada, of course, your home country, being one of the most remarkable of them. And so began legal immigration from the West Indies and elsewhere. And it ran all through the late 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, right up until Tony Blair got in. It ran all through that period with a net migration level of 30 to 40,000 people a year.
Murray is worried about the United Kingdom in these circumstances.
Malachy, how does this happen? We've got an audience here yesterday, over the weekend and today who are looking at this and saying this wouldn't be allowed to happen in England. And these politicians, they speak separately from people. People feel totally detached on this, that they have no say in this whatsoever. How does this situation come about that the politicians are so out of touch?
There's a total disconnect between the Irish political class and ordinary people. If you look at what happened last week, for instance, on Monday, now the protest in Coolock has been going on. There's been people sitting outside that protesting in the camp for 3.5 months with no violence, no difficulties, and the police moved in at 3:30 on Monday morning and moved them out. And that led to some difficulties during the day, and there was a JCB digger burnt out. But what exacerbated the situation was that the Gardaí, and the people who are doing what they call rioting, and you come from the north, Eamon, the rioting in Dublin, wouldn't even merit the name riot in Belfast.
The woke Liberals claim migration is essential for the health service.
There'll be a monarchy. I would worry about the United Kingdom in these circumstances. As you say, Piers, I mean, the gains that Sinn Féin made in the local elections, historic gains, should be troubling to anyone who is, like me, a unionist. Sinn Féin, of course, is an Irish nationalist party and is as well, in my own view, an extremist party. And that isn't mere rhetoric. Mary Lou McDonald, the head of Sinn Féin, has an unbelievable track record. I mean, just that you mentioned these earlier. There's only one statue to in Europe, and it sits in the park in Dublin. Sean Russell, an IRA member who was on a German U-boat in 1940. There's a statue to him in Dublin, and Sinn Féin always pay their respects there. Mary Lou McDonald, a couple of years ago, was taken there to pay her respects. She was, as it were, bloodied by the more militant wings of Sinn Féin. That's totally normal in Sinn Féin history. It's not just that they were an extremist party in the past, it's that they are in the present. It's not just that they're Irish nationalists, that they are actually extreme Irish nationalists, violent Irish nationalists, always have been, and seem to continue to be. I think it's an incredibly worrying development. As you say, alongside the ongoing success electorally of the Scots nationalists in the north, it's certainly possible we could see the breakup of our country. It's something where I think everyone who recognises that the United Kingdom's been an enormous force for good in the world should really be very worried about. We should be very troubled by that.
Jordan warns of the havoc a Labour government could wreak on the UK.
Well, we've gone from a population of 3.5 million to a population of over almost 5.5 million now, without building any infrastructure to deal with that. We have a shortage of hospitals, we have a shortage of schools, but most particularly we have a shortage of housing. We have 14,000 people in emergency accommodation, Irish nationals in emergency accommodation. The average price for a new house in this country now is about 450,000, which Dublin City Council somehow thinks is affordable. We have average rents for a one-bedroom apartment in Dublin, €2,000, a three-bedroom house, €3,500. And the woke Liberals will tell us, well, we need migration to run the health service. Well, if we didn't increase the population the way we did, the health service wouldn't be under the strains it's under. And also, our own doctors and nurses are being forced to emigrate because they can't afford to live here. So true. If they could stay, we wouldn't need to import the people. But we've a class that believe, and they talk about international obligations and the law. As far as I'm concerned, the government's obligation is to its own people. And we had the ludicrous situation, for instance, of the High Court in Dublin saying that the Irish government couldn't deport anybody back to the UK because of the Rwanda policy. And they said that the UK was not a safe country to return people to.
I'm absolutely jaw-droppingly amazed that the Conservatives adopted net zero policies under Boris Johnson. It's like, what the hell were they thinking? You know, the most skeptical part of my brain, and I suppose the rude part, thinks that this was cooked up by Boris Johnson to impress his young wife on the personal side, and that the Conservatives as well as a group lacked a vision so comprehensively that they had to turn to this idiot climate apocalypse mongering that's used by power-mad tyrants to cow the public into delivering them all the authority and power.
The centre-right must be reshaped to reflect the silent majority's voice.
And so, what do you think a Labour government will do to the UK?
Yeah, I mean, Keir Starmer has no leadership qualities whatsoever. He is devoid of any sort of charisma at all. And people do need a leader, that inspires them to a certain degree. He's kind of doing well because he's not the Conservatives, and there is revulsion. There is revulsion at them, a sense of betrayal about them. On the face of it, his manifesto on climate change is almost identical to the Conservatives. His manifesto on economics is almost identical to the Conservatives. But I think we know that what we'll see is trans ideology in the ascendancy. We'll see more legislation designed to divide us up into different groups rather than bring us together as human beings equal before the law. I look at his potential front bench of the top ministers. I see very little competence whatsoever. He's almost going to win by default, as opposed to, a big enthusiastic wave of support. And so in some ways, I think there's every opportunity for this just to be a one-term Labour government. There'll be no honeymoon. There'll be no sort of after-victory glow. He faces a big set of problems, the ones I mentioned earlier, the population explosion, the fact our public services don't work, the fact young people can't get a house and even their rents take up over half of their income. And he won't have the solutions to any of it. He's campaigning on a slogan of change, but actually it'll be more of the same, just ever so slightly worse.
Anti-oppression activists in the US decry UK colonialists due to the UK's success.
So here's the opportunity. The opportunity is to reshape the centre-right of British politics, to be where the silent majority actually are. Now, I know that the British Conservative Party have been around for 190 years, but nothing necessarily lasts forever. And what I'm doing with Reform UK is I am taking those stances on all of those issues that I think give us the kind of radical change that we need. And I use the word radical in an old-fashioned sense of the word. You see, I'm a traditionalist. I think that our culture matters.
Breaking up into these sort of mini national states within the United Kingdom, I think, would be a disaster.
So first of all, we have to accept to some degree that the willingness to use power and compulsion and to keep is relatively ubiquitous across the entire human family, let's say, and that opposition to that emerges with difficulty and rarely. And then you have to ask yourself, what are the preconditions for that kind of opposition? And it was certainly the case with Wilberforce, as far as I can tell, that he was driven by the conviction that all men and women are made in the image of God, and that it was a violation of a transcendent ideal that in and of itself was the violation of a transcendent ideal. And that is something that's deeply rooted in the Christian tradition. I have tried to think my way around this, right? Because I don't like to multiply unnecessary metaphysical presumptions. But I can't see at all that opposition just would have emerged the way it did in Britain if it wouldn't have been able to draw on a well of metaphysical and religious presupposition that was predicated on the idea that each person has a soul, and that soul in some manner has a divine value. And so, yes, I think that makes Britain singular and worthy of tremendous admiration.
Britain's governance legacy worldwide is no mere accident, believes Jordan.
You know, the anti-oppression people in the US who decry the UK colonialists in particular for their oppressive policies are spitting in the face of the only political system that ever successfully controlled, and not only practically because of the British Navy on the high seas, but also metaphysically and politically. Like it was the British who decided, hands down, that was wrong, and then did something about it. And that was documented historical reality. The reason for that is because the British parliamentarians were called to their conscience by English evangelical Christians, essentially, Wilberforce in particular, who said, by the doctrines that you claim to regard as holy, this should not stand, and therefore can't. And Britain did that, and the Brits as well, even in relationship to the empire. It was at the same period of time that the Brits were already deciding that colonial rule in India had to be aimed towards the emancipation of the Indian people and their elevation as responsible individuals to the realm of sovereign citizenship. And that's an amazing thing for an empire to conclude. And you can be cynical about the lag of time it took, but it didn't take that long. And India's doing pretty damn well. And I think that the British bequested their gift of governance all around the world. And that's not fluke, and they deserve credit for it. And it would be a catastrophe for Great Britain to fall down the rabbit hole of self-abnegation and not realize that it's an amazing place. I mean, there's no US without the UK. I mean, the Americans like to think that, the tradition of freedom in the US is the American Revolution. It's complete bloody nonsense. And we knew that in Canada because we knew that what the Americans did in their revolution was fight for the rights of Englishmen. And that is what they did. And that doesn't take away from the American Revolution, but it links what happened in the US to, a historical progression that had gone on for centuries before that, and that was unstoppable, right? And that was the revelation in the political space of the Judeo-Christian revelation, fundamentally, as far as I can tell.
And so I just can't wrap my head around the conservative shift to net zero, not only because it's such a profoundly anti-conservative movement, at least with regards to such things as entrepreneurial activity and freedom, and it's profoundly anti-subsidiary, so it works against the spirit of distributed responsibility. And the economics of a shift to net zero are so appallingly catastrophic that it's a miracle that anybody who could count would even ever consider it. So, what the hell was going on with and certainly this is part of the reason they're being devastated at the moment. What in the world was going on with the Conservatives? Where were their heads at?
If anyone thinks that all of this just glides by endlessly without any political consequence, I'd just say, raise your eyes a little and look to the continent.
They're offering people the best chance they'll ever have in their lives to get to civilization, or civilization to get to them.
Some people wished for chaos, only to be proven wrong along the way.
I've no particular desire for the worst things I diagnose and worry about coming to be. I mean, I think there are some people who are so incredibly narcissistic that they would rather the world went to hell as they predicted than that they would prove wrong along the way.
We pretend that the opposite in reverse is not going to have any implications and consequences.
And yet we pretend that the opposite in reverse is not very interesting, not going to have any implications and not have any consequences. It's all going to keep going on. I just don't think it will.
Murray wishes more people could take the attitude that he has taken throughout his life.
And when people rail against things like this city we're sitting in, think that it epitomizes capitalism and patriarchy, racism, more and more, I just think, I wish more people could take the attitude that I've taken throughout my life to these things, which is, you don't have to be tub-thumping, you don't have to be a wild flag-waving patriot or anything like that.
Murray urges that your attitude should be gratitude.
But your attitude should be gratitude. I mean, it's not as if this is nothing. The city we're sitting in is enough for...
Actually, it's only in London and in Scotland that people were more likely to say that immigration has a positive impact. So the lighter the colour here, the less supportive people are of immigration. You see that band here. Northern Ireland not included in this survey.
Reform is the only party seen as honest about immigration views.
But the poll also revealed deep political distrust among the public. 52% of people said they think Labour aren't telling the truth about what they really think about immigration. Not much better for the Conservatives, only 49% here, so not a big difference, saying the same thing about them. The Lib Dems doing slightly better, maybe they spelled it out better. But every region, every demographic distrusted the main two parties here on this point. The exception here, Reform UK, the only party people think are telling the truth about their views on immigration. 60%, big number, agreed the party was saying what it genuinely thought. That doesn't mean they necessarily agree with the public, but they do think they're saying what they think. And the people don't really trust the main two parties to follow through on their promises. People thought that immigration would increase under both a Labour, that's what they're talking about here, and under the Conservative government, whatever it is, despite believing that the policies of the parties is to reduce it. And finally, respondents also thought that cutting immigration would have a negative impact on the NHS, on hospitality, and on social care, but a positive impact here on housing and the housing crisis. So how do we take all that together? Well, the public understands that cutting immigration would hurt those very important sectors. So does it want politicians to be honest about that and cut immigration anyway? Or does it want to do the same things as the parties are doing, saying that immigration is too high, but to avoid damaging those sectors, keep it high while still complaining?
Murray urges us to live the good life we fought for until yesterday.
My own view is that it should partly be done by living the life that we thought to be a good life until yesterday. We're very unlikely to come up with an entirely new definition or invention, very unlikely that we're going to invent new gods, very unlikely we're going to come up with new religions, very unlikely we're sitting here in Florence, very unlikely we're going to be able to do anything this good again. So why don't we have the recognition of what a good life was that was very recognizable until yesterday? Now, that can't be done. Roger Scruton and I were talking about this recently. This can't be done by government diktat. It can't be done because the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Great Britain says that it should be so. There are certain things they could not do that might make it easier, but this just comes from people. It comes from individuals and people leading by example. When I discuss many of the things that came up in The Strange Death of Europe, sometimes people say to me, you seem, some people say, but you don't seem as het up about it. And that must mean that you know it's over, because otherwise you would be more...
Yes, there's a difference between fight and resignation.
Yes.
There's a difference between those two.
And you work out, don't you, as an adult, what it's worth